All right, section 11.1 deals with something called ratios and proportions. All right, a proportion is going to be an equation that states that two ratios are equal, and a ratio is basically a fraction, comparing two terms together. So, a proportion, A over B equals C over D. So, A over B is one ratio, set equal to another ratio, C over D. And we would read this proportion as A is to B as C is to D. This term is to that term as this one is to that one. And when we look at it, we have extremes, which would be the numbers A and D. So A here, D here. So from the top left and the bottom right, those are our extremes. And our means would be the bottom left and our top right. So A and D are the extremes, B and C are the means. And then there are two properties we can deal with when we're dealing with proportions. One's the reciprocal property, which says if two ratios are equal, their reciprocals, if they exist, are also equal. So A over B equal to C over D. Then if we got the reciprocals of those, which is mean we flip the fractions, B over A would be equal to D over C. Okay, so if they're equal normally, then if we get the reciprocals of both of them, then those reciprocals will be equal to each other as well, as long as we didn't have a zero on the top to put a zero on the bottom, because if we get a zero on the bottom, that's called undefined, and that doesn't work. And then another product or another property that works with proportions is a cross product property, which says the product of the extremes is going to equal the product of the means. And so the product of the extremes, A and D, so we're multiplying those two together, and then that's going to equal the product of the means here, B and C. So the product of the extremes equals the product of the means, and we call that the cross product property, or we're cross multiplying here. And so cross multiplying is a common way to solve when we have two proportion or have a proportion with two ratios set equal. So if we want to solve these proportions, we're going to use the cross product property. So the extremes, 2 times W, should equal the product of the means, 3 times 3. Or 2W equals 9. We divide by 2. And our W is going to be 9 halves, or that could be 4.5. That was a fairly simple example. Can be a little more difficult. So, and B, cross multiply, 10 times 5 would be equal to T times 2T. And 10 times 5 is 50. T times 2T, it's going to be 2T squared. And solve for the T. Divide by 2 on both sides. So now we have 25 equals T squared. Still trying to find T, and we have T squared, so to get rid of the square, we have to take the square root. So we're taking both square to both sides to solve. Now remember, anytime we insert that square root to solve, we have to put a plus or minus in there, because both factors of 25 could be positive or both could be negative to equal 25. So we have plus or minus 5, because the square root of 25 is 5, equals T. All right, so then last one here, looking at with the cross product. Negative 3 times 2d is going to have to equal, this one's a little more difficult, d times d minus 3. Negative 3 times 2d is negative 6d. Distribute that first d through d minus 3. D times d is d squared minus 3d. So now I have negative 6d equals d squared minus 3d. And so to solve that, I'm going to add the 6d to both sides. So now I have 0 equals d squared plus 3d. And I really don't like the 0 on the left side, so I'm just going to rearrange it. D squared plus 3d equals 0. Now we don't have 3 terms to make that a trinomial to factor to solve it. But d squared and 3d, both terms have a d in them. So I can actually pull a d out of both terms. And if I pull a d out of d squared, that just leaves d. Pull a d out of 3d, that just leaves 3. So I'm sitting at d times d plus 3 equals 0. So if I'm multiplying these two together and equals 0, then either one of those factors could equal 0. So d by itself could equal 0, or d plus 3 could equal 0. Subtract the 3 from both sides. So d equals 0, or d equals negative 3. By either one of those values for d, we're going to set that equal to 0. And that is using ratios and proportions.